Conversations with historian Jack Buchanan about key British commanders of Loyalist troops in America. Hello, and welcome to the Real American Revolution, a multimedia program to discuss with noted authors and historians what really happened before, during, and after America's War for Independence. Now, my name is Randy Flood, and today my guest is historian Jack Buchanan. Jack is one of our nation's foremost historians about the American Revolution and is affectionately known as the Dean of the Southern Campaigns. His books on the Revolution include the prize-winning The Road to Valley Forge, How Washington Built the Army That Won the Revolution, and the widely acclaimed The Road to Guilford Courthouse, The American Revolution in the Carolinas. Also, The Road to Charleston, Nathaniel Greene, The American Revolution, and Jack's most recent book, The Battle of Musgrove's Mill, 1780. Now today, Jack and I will begin discussing the third in a series of talks about British commanders who led Loyalist forces, those individuals who supported the British crown during the American Revolution. Today we'll be talking about Banastre Tarleton. So Jack, once again, welcome to the Real American Revolution.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to have you. Well, as a lead-in or background about Banastre Tarleton, let me offer this. Banastre Tarleton was born on the 21st of August, 1754. He's one of 7 children of Liverpool mayor, wealthy West Indies plantation, and slave trader John Tarleton. Educated at Middle Temple in London, Tarleton then attended Oxford University. And while attending Oxford, however, Tarleton's father died unexpectedly in 1773, and Tarleton inherited £5,000. Now, Tarleton not only lost interest in his studies, but squandered the inheritance on gambling, women, and drinking. This enraged his mother, who purchased for him a cornet's commission in the King's Dragoon Guards in 1775. 1776 found Tarleton bound for America, participating in the first British attack basically on Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, on the 28th of June, 1776. Failing to in that particular battle to capture Tarleton, the British sailed for New York City, where Tarleton was assigned to the 16th Regiment of Light Dragoons in the British New York campaign at the age of 22. Now, he first gained notoriety when he took credit for leading dragoons capturing American General Charles Lee, who at that time was second in command to George Washington at Basking Ridge, New Jersey, on the 13th of December, 1776. Later, he was appointed lieutenant colonel to command the British Legion and subsequently participated in battles at Brandywine, Germantown, and Monmouth. In late 1778, the British shifted their focus to the southern colonies in capturing Savannah, Georgia, and by 1780, the British were fully ensconced in subduing the South. At the time, Charleston was the jewel commerce and trading seaport in the South, having failed during a reconnaissance of force strength of Charleston in 1776. Sir Henry Clinton, now the commander of the British forces in North America, laid siege to Charleston in April 1780. His second in command was Charles Lord Cornwallis. Assigned to Cornwallis was Banastre Tarleton. This time, Clinton was successful. The city capitulated, and 5,600 American troops were captured when the city fell. So let's talk about Tarleton as he moves into the South. First question is, after the fall of Charleston, Tarleton became a major player in the South. What was his role during the siege of Charleston, and what really happened at Monk's Corner?
Well, at Monk's Corner, he met the American cavalry commander and his troops, Colonel William Washington, surprised them and routed them at Monk's Corner, which is about 30 miles north of Charleston. His job during the siege of Charleston with other units and other commanders, and his name really hadn't come to the fore yet, was to look out for an American relief force coming to the relief of the American garrison at Charleston.
Okay. And also, when they met at Monk's Corner, with the American cavalry there. I think Isaac Huger was also a commander along with William Washington. Uh, didn't they? Wasn't that intended to be an escape route if the troops at Charleston decided to evacuate or leave the city and come up the peninsula?
I really don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. I know that it's been compared to Gloucester Point as being an escape route if Cornwallis at Yorktown was able to get across the river and go up that peninsula. And I think there's been several comparisons. But in any event, on the 29th of May, 1780, right after Charleston, Tarleton participated in another engagement that gained for him hatred among the Americans and the nickname or the name Bloody Band. What happened at the Waxhaws?
Uh, Major Buford with the I believe it was the Fifth Continental Detachment, Virginia regulars, was marching toward Charleston to come to its relief. And then he got word the city fell, and he turned around and started marching northward back towards Virginia. The British knew of him. Cornwallis sent Tarleton after him. And Tarleton caught up with Buford at a place called the Waxhaws. And he sent word for Buford to surrender. Buford replied that he would defend to the utmost. And so Tarleton charged with both his British Legion composed of infantry and cavalry, and a 40 or 50 man contingent of the British 17th Light Dragoons. So they charged, and Buford, obviously an incompetent combat commander, told his men to withhold their fire until the British were within 10 yards of them. Totally incompetent. And they fired, and some British went down, including Tarleton's horse was hit, and he was pinned under it. And then there occurred either a massacre occurred or a massacre did not occur. Probably, probably a massacre. There's historians are back and forth on it. The latest is that it probably was not a massacre. That's not important whether it was or was not. Rebels in the South believed that men had been killed after they had put down their arms and raised the white flag, that it had indeed had been a massacre. That's what's important, what people believed, not what actually may have happened. And he became the most hated man in the South. 2 years later, on a battlefield in North Carolina, a young militiaman who wrote a memoir afterwards said there was an action in which some 6 Tories were taken prisoner. And he was called to look at the prisoners. And he wrote in his memoir, the prisoners were then hewed to death. Oh, somebody called out, Buford, Buford. And the prisoners, he wrote, were hewed to death with broadswords. So it was what people thought that was important, not what may have actually happened.
So that's really how he got the bad reputation, because I know for
Oh,
the
yeah.
rest of the war it was Bloody
Yeah.
Band or Tarleton's Quarter, which meant no quarter at all um, in battles. That's fascinating. Well, Tarleton participated in numerous skirmishes with American partisan leaders, such as American generals Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, and Thomas Sumter, the Carolina Gamecock. What can you tell us about his relationship with the Swamp Fox?
He chased Marion, the swamp fox. He chased him and chased him and chased him and never caught him. But uh, when he finally was called to go after Sumter, after Cornwallis called him to go after Sumter, he had driven Marion into the swamps, but he never caught up with Marion.
Did he give him the name, the Swamp Fox?
No, I don't know how. I think maybe that must have come much later after the revolution, uh,
Mhm.
uh, to my knowledge. Um,
Sure.
Tarleton certainly. There's no evidence that Tarleton gave him that name, and but then he left Marion because Cornwallis called him uh, to go after Sumter, who uh, Cornwallis thought was his greatest foe in the South, most
Mhm.
troublesome foe.
Well, when he went after, he had several skirmishes with Thomas Sumter, two in particular that are pretty interesting. What can you tell us about Fishing Creek, which occurred on the 18th of August, 1780, and then later Blackstock's Plantation on the 20th of November, 1780?
Right. Um, Shortly after the Battle of Camden, where Tarleton fought, uh, he was sent by Cornwallis to regain prisoners and supplies that Sumter had captured, and uh, he chased Sumter through that hot August. You know how South Carolina is in
Mhm.
August, through that hot South Carolina August, over rough territory up Fishing Creek. When he caught up with Sumter, Sumter could be a careless commander. His Sumter's command was sleeping. Uh, Sumter was in his breeches and nightshirt, sleeping under his sleeping at the time when Tarleton attacked at Fishing Creek, and he scattered Sumter's band. Sumter leaped onto a horse bareback and escaped. And that was his first encounter, Tarleton's first encounter with Sumter, in which he tried. But
Mhm.
Sumter soon, as Cornwallis wrote, Sumter soon was back in the field and he had a real knack for recruiting men,
Mhm.
uh, and building up his force again. Whereupon, and that is when Cornwallis called Tarleton away from his actions against Marion and wanted him to go after Sumter. And that is when the Battle of Blackstocks took place. Uh,
Mhm.
Sumter and other militia commanders. It's very interesting. Sumter was famous for frontal assaults, uh, and to the point where at his final fight, one officer who had been with him from the beginning said, "That's it. I will never serve under you again, sir," and just left. Colonel Thomas Taylor said that.
Mhm.
Anyway, uh, Cornwallis, feeling Sumter was his most dangerous foe, called Tarleton to go after Sumter. Sumter and other militia leaders formed at Blackstock's on a ridge, Blackstock's farm, on a ridge with riflemen behind rail fences and in the houses themselves. And no frontal assault this time. And I've always wondered whether these other militia leaders who had just as much a hand in setting up the defense as Sumter did, because, as I say, he was famous for frontal assaults, but this was a defensive battle.
Mhm.
Tarleton caught up with them and did what he usually did, launched a frontal assault, took heavy losses of regulars, uh, and one officer, John Money, who was a favorite of Cornwallis's, was killed. Uh, and Tarleton, in an act of personal bravery, leaped from his horse, grabbed Money's body, threw it over his horse, leaped aboard, and rode off. The British took heavy losses. They lost the Battle of Blackstocks, and then Tarleton lied about it. He lied in his official report to Cornwallis, and he lied in his memoir. It was his first defeat, and as far as he was concerned, one lie after another about that.
Hmm. Well, that battle at Blackstocks was on the 20th of November, 1780. And that brings us really up to 1781. And on the 16th of January, 1781, Tarleton confronted another American general, Daniel Morgan, at the Cowpens. Now, the Battle of the Cowpens is one of the most important battles in America's war for independence. What happened at the Cowpens?
Brigadier General Daniel Morgan, who was Greene's really second in command in the South, um, the battle at the Battle of Cowpens, it was the only clear-cut British defeat in a traditional battle. In a traditional battle, what Morgan did was put his militia in the front line under Andrew Pickens. Pickens sent out riflemen. He kept his main militia line intact, sent out militiamen to encounter the British as they came. Behind the main militia line were the regulars under Lieutenant Colonel John Eager Howard of Maryland. And this was the 1st Maryland Regiment and the Delawares and Virginia militia who were discharged Continental soldiers. So it had a veteran line really of regulars. Tarleton, as was his wont, came on that morning and just frontal assault, attacked right away. The American sharpshooters out in front of the main line of militia picked off officers and sergeants, and then retreated to the main line of militia, who wrought more damage with a couple of damaging volleys. And then they peeled off to the left and went behind and this was all planned. This was all planned by Morgan. And Morgan, by the way, a rough, tough frontiersman himself, but a masterful combat commander. And in fact, the night before, he went around the campfire. One diarist said, I don't think he slept a wink all night. And he said, 3 volleys, boys, 3 volleys. That's all I call for. Then you can go home and your wives and sweethearts will kiss you. Well, anyway, the main line of militia had gone behind the regulars, and then the regulars and Tarleton's men began trading volleys, as was the wont in the battlefield actions in those days. John Eager Howard, one of the finest regimental commanders in American military history, gave an order to a unit on his right, and it was misunderstood. They turned and began to retreat. Tarleton thought the Americans were starting to break, and he sent the Highlanders and cavalry to attack the right wing, American right wing. Howard, who could think on his feet, didn't panic. He saw what was happening. He turned his whole force of regulars around and they began to march to the rear. They are marching to the rear. They're not running. They're marching in regular formation. Morgan comes riding up and says, are you beaten? And Howard said, do men who march like that look beaten? And Morgan says, right. And he says, I'll pick a point for you to turn around. And they marched back. The British, out of order, thinking it's over, the Americans are running away. We're running after them. At the point that Morgan picked, Howard turned his men around in formation, and they delivered one fire into the British coming at them, and then charged with the bayonet, and the British crumbled. And it was one of the outstanding victories of the war, actually, of the war. Uh, Char uh, he Tarleton lost all of his infantry, either dead or prisoners, and his cavalry fled the field.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Devastating for the British for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Really, Cornwallis had lost the eyes and ears of his army.
Yeah. Well, he lost the entire left wing
Yeah.
of his army
He
at Kings
lost
Mountain.
lost Ferguson at Kings Mountain, and now his light infantry had been decimated.
And certainly a lot less effective. Well, he Tarleton continued to participate in a number of skirmishes, and
Yeah.
even tried to capture Virginia Governor Thomas Jefferson and members of the Virginia General Assembly. But what did he do? Did he do anything significant, or how did it unfold that Cornwallis sent him after Thomas Jefferson?
Well, all I know is that he was assigned to go after Jefferson,
Mhm.
and who was at Charlottesville at his
Right.
home, and evidently Jefferson got out just in the nick of time.
In Virginia, we have this hero on horseback. We call him our Paul Revere, Jack Juliet,
Oh yeah,
who was at a tavern and apparently sleeping outside, and saw these troops go by, and he went in and asked the tavern manager where these troops were headed because they were asking for directions. And when he said they're going after Jefferson in Charlottesville, Jack Juliet mounted his steed, and since he knew about every backwoods rabbit path there was, he was able to get to Monticello before Tarleton got there. And as a result, apparently, as Tarleton and his troops were coming up the mountain to Monticello, Jefferson was leaving on the other side.
yeah,
So, and they focus on that in Virginia history books.
oh yeah.
So, well, finally, when the Cornwallis attempted to establish a military base of operations at Yorktown, which was the number one tobacco port in America at the time, Tarleton was assigned, along with Major John Graves Simcoe, to protect a possible escape route across the York River at Gloucester Point, uh, from where the British fortifications were at Yorktown. And after Cornwallis surrendered, after that siege, that Franco-American siege, what became of Tarleton? He had to surrender with the rest of the command, as did Simcoe. But what happened to Tarleton during the surrender negotiations and the aftermath of that siege?
Well, after the surrender, as happened in those days, the French threw a dinner for the British officers, and all the invitations went out to these British officers to attend the French dinner, except one. Tarleton did not receive an invitation. That's what the French thought of him.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know after the siege in the fall of Yorktown, that Banastre Tarleton was paroled and returned to England, where he continued to serve in the British Army as well as in the Parliament, which you could do back then. And he promoted slavery and the slave trade also in Parliament because his family, his father in particular, had begun the slave trade for the Tarleton family in England. And eventually he died in January of 1833. Can you share with us any thoughts about Tarleton's character and how he was treated, uh, when he returned to Britain?
Well, he was welcomed as a hero, which he was not, uh, and a war hero. And he got in with the dissolute crowd led by the Prince of Wales, who would later become George IV. And this was some hard drinking, hard womanizing crowd. And the he became involved with a famous British actress of the time, Mary Robinson, who was known as Perdita after her famous role. And they became lovers and lived together for about 20 years uh, until she finally, according to a British diarist, he um, she finally kicked him out because of his designs on her daughter, who had just turned 21, which gives you a good look at Tarleton's character. A historian that you and I both know, Mark Edward Lender, wrote to me about Tarleton. Tarleton was a world-class cad.
Well, apparently he bragged about it in his memoirs. He bragged about his conquests in America.
Oh yeah, oh yes. Horace Walpole, the famous British politician, said Tarleton claims that has slain more men and lain with more women than any other man in the army. And Richard Brinsley Sheridan, the playwright who had known Tarleton before the war, heard, lain with, what a rapes are the relaxation of murderers. Yeah,
Oh my gosh. Well,
yeah.
Tarleton,
And he was a very vain man. In Parliament, he was once laughed at because he said he wished one day to have the opportunity to talk about battles with Napoleon.
that's interesting. Well, apparently it's well known that he had wanted to command British armies when he went back, and although he continued to be promoted from time to time, he could never achieve that lasting command that was achieved really by Wellington. Wellington apparently didn't want to have anything to do with him.
And he used to criticize Wellington in Parliament.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, yeah. He never saw a battle after that, and in fact, he in his memoir he really disparages Cornwallis, who had
Hmm.
been his champion in the South. And that nixed, Cornwallis went to India as governor general and commander in chief. And that nixed any chance Tarleton had that Cornwallis, after Cornwallis read that memoir,
Hmm.
I'm not taking him to India with me.
Hmm. Cornwallis had an exemplary career after, after Yorktown. We view him as a loser here in America, but after he left America, he only rose higher
He was,
in public esteem with King George, and even went over as an envoy to Frederick the Great's court.
yes,
Uh,
and he was also, besides Governor General of India, Governor General of Ireland,
mhm,
in which he championed an Irish Parliament, uh, much to the dissatisfaction of George III. Uh, and he was also sent back to India as Governor General a second time, but died on his way
mhm,
up country and is buried in India.
mhm.
His you know
Apparently, he fell in love with India, and I think the people over there really enjoyed having him as Governor General, to say the
well,
least.
I don't know if the Indians did, but British did.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jack, thank you so much.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
to our viewers and listeners, I'm talking with historian Jack Buchanan, and we've discussed three of the most important British commanders who led Loyalist forces during the American War for Independence: John Harris Cruger, Patrick Ferguson, and now in our third episode, Banastre Tarleton. My name is Randy Flood. Join us again next time for another exciting interview with an outstanding historian about the American Revolution, the real American Revolution. So long for now.